For some background, I live in the California foothills. My parents and I moved into this house from the city in late 2017 after it had been sitting empty for over a year. The day we moved in, my mother and I arrived first to clean while my father and brother drove the moving truck. Right off the bat, I was uneasy but tried to write it off. The property felt heavy, is the only way I can describe it. Some people on here describe the feeling of being watched inside their homes, but I had that feeling anytime I stepped outside. We were going to sweep and mop the floors, dust the baseboards and windowsills, when I started noticing this white granular powder all along the baseboards, windowsills, and the doorways. I immediately told my mother, who told me not to worry about it and sweep it up. By the time I had swept up every room and cleaned off the windowsills, I was certain it was salt. And a lot of it. But fine, whatever. The people that lived here before were superstitious. Okay, I can live with that. We unpacked the truck over the next week. I was setting up my room when the next bizarre events started happening. Knocking on the windows, always quick raps that sounded like someone knocking with their knuckles. It would happen so often on all the windows in the house, but when you would turn, no one would be there. You'd go outside. No one would be around the house. This only escalated. My brother and I would walk the dogs around the property. They were older small dogs who were always good-natured and calm, except for when they were outside at this new house. They would growl, puff out, and get extremely agitated. They hated being outside. Then we started finding the animal carcasses. They were always small creatures. Rats, toads, bats. The biggest we ever found was a raccoon. The animals had been gutted. A single deliberate line down their torso, starting at their chest and ending near their rear. No internal organs left. They looked practically mummified, like something had sucked the fluid and blood and organs right out of them. It was one of the most bizarre and brutal things I had ever seen. My brother would stay up late in his room on his computer every night. He liked to game with his friends until the early morning hours. He does not spook easy, but on more than one occasion, I would wake up to him shaking me awake, terrified, saying something massive on two legs was walking around outside his bedroom window, which he would have open at night. He said it would walk right up to his bedroom window and stop, and when he would look toward the sound, he could hear it scrambling away. I never saw it with my own eyes, and neither did he, but the motion lights outside would be activated every single time, leading to the woods near the back of our property. I know what you're probably thinking. All of this up to this point can be explained away rationally. A crazy person living in the woods, some neighbor messing with us for whatever reason. Well, that was what I told myself too, so I could sleep a little easier at night. Then the banging started. It was so loud, and it would sound like it was coming from everywhere at once. The walls would literally vibrate, picture frames rattling right off the walls. It was like something massive, stronger than any crazy person, was pounding on the exterior walls of the house, always late at night, and always in more places than just one. I could never pinpoint the source directly. My brother and I would stumble out of our bedrooms petrified, and my mom would lead us to her room where we would stay after that. My dad would walk the perimeter of our property with his gun, but never found anything. No footprints, no people, nothing. This happened for probably 6 months, and every time a major event would happen, my dad would walk the perimeters with his rifle and come back with nothing. We felt like we were going insane. Then suddenly, it just stopped. The mutilated animals stopped appearing. I stopped feeling like I was being watched anytime I would go outside. My dogs stopped being so on edge anytime I took them out, and the property itself seemed to get lighter, like it finally took a deep breath after holding it for so long. I genuinely have no explanation, or even a clue as to what that creature, being, entity even was. I'm just glad it seems to have moved on. My name is Mark Henderson, and until the summer of 2018, I considered myself a rational person. I lived in a small town in northern Washington, where tales of Bigfoot were as common as the pine trees. People talked about sightings and mysterious noises in the forest, but I dismissed them as tall tales or the results of overactive imaginations. That was before I had my own encounter. It all began on a warm July evening. My best friend Sam and I decided to go camping in the Cascade Range, a dense forest area known for its stunning scenery and abundant wildlife. We had been planning this trip for months, eagerly anticipating a weekend away from our mundane lives. As we drove deeper into the forest, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the road. The air was cool and crisp, filled with the scent of pine and earth. We arrived at our chosen campsite just as twilight descended, quickly setting up our tent and starting a campfire. The first night was uneventful. We sat around the fire roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. The forest was alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, a symphony of crickets, owls, and the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. I found it peaceful, a stark contrast to the noise and stress of everyday life. The following day, we set out on a hike to explore the area. The trail wound through thick forests and over rocky terrain, offering breathtaking views of the surrounding mountains. We stopped for lunch by a crystal-clear stream, enjoying the serenity of the wilderness. Little did we know that our idyllic trip was about to take a terrifying turn. That evening, as we sat around the campfire, we heard an unusual noise. It was a low, guttural growl, unlike anything I had ever heard before. Sam and I exchanged uneasy glances, straining our ears to catch the sound again. But the forest had fallen silent, the usual chorus of night creatures eerily absent. "Probably just a bear," Sam said, though his voice lacked conviction. We had seen bear tracks earlier in the day, so his explanation made sense. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. We decided to turn in early, hoping to get an early start on our hike the next day. The tent was a small, two-person setup, offering little protection from whatever lurked outside. As I lay there staring at the canvas ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig outside sent my heart racing. Sometime in the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by a loud thud. I sat up, straining to see in the darkness. Sam was already awake, his flashlight casting a dim beam of light around the tent. "What was that?" I whispered. "I don't know," he replied, his voice tense. "It sounded close." We listened intently, but the night had fallen silent once more. After a few minutes, we heard another sound, this time a heavy, deliberate footstep. Whatever was out there was big, and it was getting closer. I grabbed the small hunting knife I had brought with me, feeling woefully unprepared. Sam had a can of bear spray, which suddenly seemed inadequate. We stayed perfectly still, our breaths shallow as the footsteps grew louder. They circled the tent, slow and deliberate, before stopping just outside. In the dim light, we could see a shadow looming over us, massive and menacing. My heart pounded in my chest, fear paralyzing me. The creature outside let out a low, rumbling growl, the sound vibrating through the ground. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. We stayed awake the rest of the night, too terrified to sleep. When dawn finally broke, we emerged from the tent, our nerves frayed. The ground around our campsite was disturbed, large footprints pressed into the soil. They were too big to be a bear's, with a shape that was distinctly humanoid. "Do you think," Sam began, but I cut him off, "let's just pack up and get out of here." We quickly broke camp, eager to leave the forest behind. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I glanced in the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see a shadowy figure emerging from the trees. But there was nothing. The rest of the drive home was uneventful, but the encounter left a lasting impression on both of us. We tried to rationalize what we had seen, coming up with various explanations, but none of them fit. The memory of those massive footprints and the low growl haunted me, a reminder that there are still mysteries in this world that defy explanation. Bigfoot gifting behavior. This first started happening in 2013. The family friend Joe lives on the outskirts of town, about 5 miles away from the nearest gas station. There's quite a bit of forested area, but most of it is private property. There's a house right across the street from his, so he's not totally isolated. Anyway, one evening, Joe got done picking squash from his garden. He had put them in a bucket that he left on the porch and forgot about overnight. The next day, he went looking for the squash and realized that he left it outside. He went out onto the porch, and the bucket was gone. He didn't really think too much of it. He figured a raccoon had taken it. He did find it strange, however, that whatever it was had taken the whole bucket and that none of the squash had been spilled out. It was like something had carried it away, taking care to not spill any of it, as opposed to rummaging through it like a raccoon would. A few days later, Joe came home from work to find a dead mouse on his doorstep wrapped in a leaf and some grass. He looked at it for a moment in curiosity. This mouse had been meticulously placed inside the leaf along with the grasses, almost like a sandwich. He then began to think that maybe someone was playing a prank on him, or maybe there was some witch or somebody in the woods trying to put a curse on him. Nothing else happened for about a year until one night, Joe was sitting in his living room watching television when he saw something out of the corner of his eye through the window around his garden. He looked out and saw a figure hunched over and looking through his squash plants. He then went outside to confront whoever or whatever this thing was. When he got outside, he was surprised by just how little noise the creature was making, like it was trying to hide. He took a step on his porch, causing the wood to creak, and the creature looked up at him. He couldn't get a good look at its face, but there was a distinctive eye shine caused by it looking up towards his porch lights. It stood up on two legs and he got a good look at its body. It was very large and bulky. He estimated it must have been at least 7 feet tall. It was black and hairy and man-like in its form. As soon as it saw him, it bolted away and into the woods with lightning speed, still barely making a sound. There was no doubt in his mind that it was a Bigfoot, and Joe understandably had trouble falling asleep that night. As he laid awake, he began to wonder if the creature he had just seen had any connection to the mouse he had received at his doorstep about a year ago. And he definitely believed that thing could carry off that bucket of squash. The next morning, Joe decided to try a little bit of an experiment. He took some turkey and rolled it up a leaf and some grass, much like the mouse had been, and set it on his picnic table out on the lawn and left for work. When he got back that evening, the turkey, leaves, and grass were gone. He studied the area around the picnic table, but was unable to find anything. Not even the grass had been disturbed as far as he could tell. Then, he approached his door, and on his doorstep was another mouse, this time decapitated, and instead of leaves or grass, there was a small pile of berries next to it. He hasn't seen the creature again, but he believes that it's the one he's been swapping gifts with. It continues to present day, where he got a whole deer antler just 4 months ago. He set up trail cameras before to try to see if he can capture the thing on video leaving presents, but he never catches anything. He told me he feels like it's always watching him and will intentionally not show up when he puts up the cameras, but I don't know if it's intelligent enough to understand what a trail camera and that it takes pictures. But has anyone else heard of this Sasquatch gifting behavior? I've always loved the mountains. There's something about the crisp air, the towering trees, and the pristine, untouched snow that brings me a sense of peace. Growing up in Colorado, my weekends were often spent hiking, camping, and exploring the Rocky Mountains. As an adult, I continued the tradition, escaping to the wilderness whenever city life became too overwhelming. Little did I know that one winter, my love for the mountains would lead me to an encounter that would forever change my perception of reality. It was late January when I decided to take a solo trip to a remote cabin my family owned. Nestled deep in the San Juan Mountains, the cabin was a perfect getaway from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. I packed my truck with enough supplies for a week and set off early one Friday morning, eager to leave the city behind and immerse myself in nature. The drive up was uneventful, though the weather forecast had predicted a significant snowfall over the weekend. As I wound my way through the mountain roads, the sky grew darker, and flakes of snow began to fall. By the time I reached the cabin, a thick blanket of snow covered the ground, and the air was filled with the quiet hush that only a heavy snowfall can bring. I spent the first 2 days in blissful solitude, hiking through the snow-covered forest, reading by the fire and enjoying the tranquility of the wilderness. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire, the occasional creak of the cabin as it settled, and the distant howl of the wind. It was perfect. On the third night, the snowstorm intensified. I stood by the window, watching the snowflakes dance in the beam of my flashlight, when I noticed something peculiar. Near the edge of the clearing where the cabin stood, there were footprints. They were large, far larger than any human or animal tracks I had ever seen. My curiosity piqued. I decided to investigate in the morning. When dawn broke, the storm had lessened but not ceased. I donned my warmest clothes, grabbed my camera and a flashlight, and ventured outside. The tracks were still there, partially covered by the fresh snowfall. I followed them into the forest, my breath visible in the cold air. As I traced the path of the footprints, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The trees loomed tall and silent around me, their branches heavy with snow. The tracks led me deeper into the forest, away from the safety of the cabin. I should have turned back, but my curiosity pushed me forward. The footprints were strange. They were spaced far apart, as if whatever made them had a long stride. Each print was deep and well-defined, suggesting a creature of considerable size and weight. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. After an hour of trekking, I came to a small clearing. The footprints led to the center, where they abruptly stopped. There was no sign of the creature that had made them, no indication of where it had gone. I stood there, perplexed and slightly unnerved. The silence was oppressive, the only sound the faint rustle of the wind through the trees. Suddenly, I heard a low, guttural growl. It seemed to come from all around me, echoing through the forest. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the trees but saw nothing. The growl came again, closer this time. Panic set in and I turned to retrace my steps back to the cabin. As I hurried through the forest, the growl followed me, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away. It was as if the creature was toying with me, letting me know that I was not alone. By the time I reached the cabin, I was breathless and shaking. I bolted the door behind me and collapsed by the fire, trying to calm my racing heart. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the growl was nothing more than the wind. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I had felt the presence of something out there, something that was watching me. The rest of the day passed in a haze of fear and paranoia. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind sent my heart racing. As night fell, the storm picked up again, and I found myself constantly peering out the window, expecting to see those footprints or the creature that had made them. Sleep was elusive. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying the events of the day over and over. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, I heard it again, the growl. It was louder this time, more insistent. I sat up, my pulse quickening. The sound seemed to come from just outside the cabin. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously approached the window. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the snow-covered ground. At first, I saw nothing. Then my breath caught in my throat. There at the edge of the clearing were two glowing eyes. They were large and set wide apart, reflecting the light of my flashlight with an eerie yellow glow. I couldn't make out the creature's shape, but I could see the outline of something massive standing just beyond the tree line. It watched me unblinking, its eyes never leaving mine. I stood frozen, unable to move or look away. The growl came again, low and menacing. I felt a chill run down my spine. The creature took a step forward and I could see the outline of its body more clearly. It was tall with broad shoulders and long, powerful limbs. It was covered in thick, dark fur that blended seamlessly with the night. Just as I thought it might come closer, the creature turned and disappeared into the forest, its glowing eyes fading into the darkness. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the spot where it had been. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear, and I fell into a fitful sleep. The next morning, I packed my things and left the cabin. I told myself it was just an animal, perhaps a bear or some other creature native to the mountains. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had seen something that defied explanation, something that shouldn't exist. As I drove away, I glanced back at the cabin. its silhouette growing smaller in the rearview mirror. The mountains had always been a place of solace for me, but now they held a darkness, a mystery that I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. Years have passed since that winter, but the memory remains vivid. I haven't returned to the cabin, and I doubt I ever will. Some mysteries are best left unsolved, some encounters best left in the shadows of the past. But every now and then, when the wind howls through the trees, I find myself wondering if it's still out there, watching, waiting. I believe I had a close encounter with something strange in Mendocino National Forest. Last year, I had a very strange experience in a national forest out in California. I was by myself on a road trip with my dog, and I was driving pretty far into Mendocino National Forest. I like to camp in national parks and forests because it's isolated, so my dog can roam and they're free of charge, a trade-off for sketchy rough drives into the park sometimes and lack of assistance. Anyway, I was driving up this dirt road kind of curling up a mountain around 5 p.m. It was very nice out, sunny and warm with a slight breeze. Nothing serious happened, but I felt extremely uncomfortable driving into the area, and that feeling did not let up. Driving up the mountain, I felt like I shouldn't stay there, and I even texted my boyfriend about it for as long as I could before my phone completely lost service. I was looking for a sign of another person having been around the area lately, but didn't see anything. I pulled over and got out of my car with my dog to look over the edge and noticed a dead squirrel and some broken glass mixed in with the dirt and gravel road. Yuka, my dog, starts to growl slightly. She is vocal, but I've almost only ever seen or heard her growl at or with other dogs. I did see her growl at a possum once, so it could be something she smelled maybe. This place continued to make me feel quite on edge, but I pride myself in being an independent traveler and backpacker, so I decided to continue at least a bit further with my grumbling pup to see if I could find a good place to camp. I continued to notice more dead animals. Keep in mind, no one is going to be going more than 5 to 10 miles per hour up this thing, and that's if there's anyone even there. I hear men's voices. They sound close, and I think I should call out to them, so I stop my car, but then kind of freeze up and feel like I shouldn't. I can't really make out what they're saying. I don't see any sign of people anywhere, and I get back in my car and continue to slowly drive forward and cautiously look for where the voices could be coming from. I've never ran into other people in a national park or forest when I've gone this deep in. The unsettling feeling grows about the voices, which have sort of come and gone a few times, and I give up and begin to turn my car around. I honestly don't remember how Yuka was acting on the way down. I was scared and focused on getting out of there. I just distinctly remember being surprised at her grumbling when we were standing outside of my car. Kind of dangerously quickly, I went back down the mountain, not seeing any sign of anyone. I decided to spring for luxury and get a hotel for the night. I figured I was just fine. Huge and open spaces can be intimidating, I told myself, and the voices could have been echoing from somewhere far off, and they just sounded close. Animals die, glass gets broken, nothing happened, cool. But I remember this place, it sticks with me. Whenever I'm watching scary movies, if I'm walking my dog in the woods at night, nothing compares to the feeling I had driving up that mountain, and it's honestly kind of interesting to me, as well as frightening. I recently happened across some information as well as some Native American lore that made me feel extremely uneasy. Fast forward a year, I've mentioned this place to a few people and the haunting vibes it gave me, but nothing much more. Googled the national park once and didn't see anything, but didn't look much either. I like scary movies and things of that nature, so my boyfriend and I were coming up on finishing our road trip just yesterday. We were in Wyoming for a wedding. There were only 2 or 3 hours left, and the sun had set, so we decided to listen to some scary podcasts and YouTube videos. We went from the podcast to the X-Files and ended up on a True Stories video dealing with Native American lore. I'm half paying attention, petting my dog, playing Pokemon on an emulator, and I hear the narrator mention Wendigos. Very briefly says what they are and casually mentions they can mimic voices. I mean it when I say the most horrible chills I have ever had in my life crawl down my spine, and I stare at my boyfriend and ask him if he remembers that national forest I was freaked out about last year. He says he does, and he reminds me that he texted me. I was probably close to a Wendigo. I remember him saying that, but didn't know much about their lore and thought he was just being funny, like, yeah, Bigfoot is probably stalking you or some other dad joke. And he was like, no, I mean, I was mostly joking, but I said it specifically because you said you were hearing voices that you couldn't find a trace of. I feel strange as fuck, and I start Googling Wendigos and other related stuffs. They are allegedly able to mimic human voices, and they would live in that sort of area. It all matched up. Obviously, there's a ton of questionable info out there, but I tried to find more reputable websites and authentic experiences. I then specifically looked up missing persons in the area, and the first headline that catches my eye is, "Another family goes missing in Mendocino." And I went through different websites and news articles of people going missing, but they are all a little hidden underneath national park websites and pictures of trees. I remembered looking up the forest about a year ago and didn't see anything, and realized these stories didn't seem to be talked about much, which also piqued my intuition. It was stated that well over 100 people in the past 8 years have gone missing and not been found, on top of many which are found dead. It just has my intuition super spiked. Remembering how unsafe I felt and how much I wanted to get out of there terrifies me, and I felt so uneasy about what I was hearing, and do to this day. My dog and I are very close. She was a stray that started following me one day, and I ended up bringing home from Costa Rica. So her little growls along the way makes me feel like there was something wrong. Even though it was just a storytelling video, those stories originate from somewhere. I have done a lot of solo traveling, both in and out of the country, and I have never had such a bad feeling, on top of seeing an unnecessary amount of dead animals in a national forest, which just seems strange. I don't think I'll be doing more solo traveling, unless it's around civilization. I grew weed in Northern California for 5 years. It was on this hilltop on a very remote property. There had never been a road up there, as it was too steep, but we managed to put in a quad road up to the spot. When we got up there, I was surprised to see the root ball of a tree, probably oak, had been turned upside down and planted deep into the ground, and it made a nice sturdy seat to look out over the impressive view. In fact, this spot offered a clear vantage point for miles, and trails intersected in many directions. It was a very strategic spot to be, turns out. Well, the next day I go to walk up the hill to keep working up there. Keep in mind, this was the second day humans had ever been in this spot, I guarantee you. Right when I get on the road we had cleared yesterday, this huge flat boulder came roaring down the hill, right past me within a few feet. It didn't almost hit me, but it was clearly thrown by something. No trees fell, no wind was blowing. But to make it even more weird, in this whole area, there were no big rocks like that. It was all brown clay material. In fact, you had to look to find any kind of rocks up there, which made it super easy to dig giant cannabis holes, and you'd only find little ones. So where did this giant rock come from, and how was it hurling down the hill right as I was about to start walking up it? There is no other explanation other than someone had picked up the rock from somewhere else, carried it up there, and hurled it like a boulder. For context, this rock was about 2.5 feet in diameter and about 6 inches wide. Very heavy. It would have to be a Sylvester Stallone up there to do that. I decided to say fuck it and walked up the hill, even though I knew something weird had just happened, and proceeded to claim my territory. In walking the trails, I later found a similar rock in a remote clearing by a stream. It was a large, flat circular rock way out of place, sitting there like a makeshift stool. No rhyme or reason for it, as there were no quartz rocks like that anywhere in the area, much less no large rocks like that anywhere around. Then I started having the dreams. I had a dream where I was surrounded by a family of Bigfoot, and I jumped on top of my van and they all just kind of stood there and were curious. There were others as well. I never saw any Bigfoot, but unless Stallone was up there hurling stones, I can't offer any other explanations. Now there was another time at Death Valley I was camping out and heard big whoops coming from near Panamint Mountain in the Panamint Valley, which is a very remote place where very few people go. It sounded like two primates, but at first I thought two men were having sex. But it kept going on, and it was so booming loud, I soon realized men don't have the lung capacity to project like that, considering it was coming from the top of the mountain almost 8K feet up, and we were at like zero elevation. In looking back on maps, there's a green belt that extends along the tops of Death Valley Mountains up into the Sierra, and it would make sense the creatures would be up there at that time of year. There are tons of caves in the area to hide. One I even spotted the next day that looked like you would have to climb to get there. Now, if you just want to write me off as having an overactive imagination, I now work as a biologist for a Native American tribe and routinely go to places rarely traveled and have spent more than half my adult life camping out in remote places in nature. You have to spend time in nature to have these experiences, and simply put, most people either don't or don't do it enough. Now, to my point, it's commonly spoken about that Bigfoot are real, and the wife of my boss even saw one when she was a child. She is a very nice and matter-of-fact type of person, and has no reason to make up what I'm about to share. The Indians in general don't share with outsiders, but as I said, working for them afforded me a unique perspective that I share with respect. She said she was playing in her yard, on the res in a remote mountainous part, and felt something watching her. She turned to see a Bigfoot on the hill above her, not 100 feet away, watching her with a keen interest. She ran inside, and when the parents came out, he was gone, but they told her never to play out there alone again. They moved afterward. She said she saw it plain as day. It was a Bigfoot. There are many other stories about it I heard up there, some quite amazing, but only share this one out of respect. Bigfoot encounter with my whole family. When I was really young, probably about 5 or 6, my family went camping. At the tippy top of the mountain, you really couldn't get higher on said mountain. There was a lake we were camping next to, so of course my family was fishing. My mom, dad, my uncle, and I were on the shore trying to get some fish. Across the shore, on the other side of the small lake, my dad had noticed a huge brown-black humanoid figure just standing still and faced right at us. It had to have been 8+ feet tall, maybe even taller since it was so far away. So like any human would naturally do, my dad tried yelling at it, since he had thought it was a prank of some sorts. I don't remember what my dad said, but I remember the sound the creature made back. It wasn't anything we understood, just a kind of unintelligible screeching. It did, however, sound like he knew what he was saying, if that makes sense. Like he was saying something to us, only in his language. We were all looking at it at that point. My grandparents and my big brother had joined us. I remember my parents attempted to recreate the screeches he was saying, and he would respond. This went on for just a couple of minutes. Then the creature took off. And I mean, took off. Mind you, the entire time he was on 2 feet, much like a human. He turned and started running towards the forest and was out of sight in seconds. He had to have been running like 25 to 30 miles per hour. My brother, grandpa, and dog tried chasing it and went to where we had seen him at and the direction he left in. They did find a huge lump of black hair that was stuck in a barbed wire fence, although I'm not certain it was really from the creature. Tell me why we didn't leave. We spent the night still, in tents. It was very windy, and I don't think anyone actually slept. I think about it from time to time, but it honestly isn't that rare of an encounter in Utah. I've seen UFOs, my siblings have seen skinwalkers, my brother was followed by a UFO, and I lived right by Skinwalker Ranch my whole life. I promise my family is not a bunch of kooks. Well, maybe a little, but not in the sense we all made up the same encounter.